Hey, Jared.
It's going to be a tribute to the rocket slide.
Oh,
Also, it's going to be rocket man.
I forgot about Rocket Slide.
How was the show? Was it?
All right, welcome to the final press conference for Mayor Robinson. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. I always say it's a pretty slow day when you tune into the mayor's press conference. You might notice that I look a little different today than I normally do. No suit and tie. I wanted to dress like you might find me on the street in about, I don't know, a day and a half when Mayor-elect Bungars takes over, who's in the audience. We look forward to your tenure, Mayor Bungars. So with that, I'd like to take some time today and do something I don't normally do. I normally don't talk about myself or things that we've accomplished per se, but I thought it might be pertinent to do that. I'd also like to give the citizens who tune in a little glimpse inside of, yesterday I alluded to the how the sausage is made. It's a metaphor a lot of times used in business and government to refer to the process of how things happen, and so I thought I'd review a few of the things that have happened over the last 4 years and just talk to you a little bit about how those occurred. And so with that, the first thing I'd like to do is give some thank yous out. Number one, thank you to the citizens of Spencer. Government is of the people, by the people, for the people, and without the people there is no government. And so thank you. All of the people who sit as elected officials and as staff members are just that, they're people. And most of them are citizens of Spencer. The elected officials are, most of the staff is. But what I found in my tenure as mayor, something that always intrigued me, was when you would hear phrases like the city. And people would describe the city as an entity that is somehow unconnected to the people who are in it. And the reality is the city is the people. And so remember, as we move forward together in the journey, the government is the people who work in it and are elected to it. And so of the people, by the people, for the people, if we continue to remember that we're dealing with people, and the people do contribute to process and rules and legislation and things of that nature, but it all relates to people. Number two is the staff. I'd like to thank the city managers that I served with. There's 4. Little trivia, I don't know if you know that, but there's 4 of them. The first one was interim city manager Brian Weave. I think Brian was interim for maybe 8 days before Amanda officially started. And then, of course, Amanda Mack. I'd like to thank her for the time that we spent together. The mayor of any community and the city manager, I think, share a relationship that is different than the other elected officials. We all have a relationship with the staff, but the mayor and the city manager do a lot of strategic thinking and have some pretty in-depth conversations together, and so I'd like to thank Amanda for that time. The third one is a repeat, or a retread, I guess we could say. Brian Weave, interim city manager, spent the next, was it 6, 7, 8 months maybe as interim? 6, yeah, right around there. Brian's to my left if you can't see him. And then, of course, our newest city manager, Dan Gifford, who we were incredibly excited to have on board, and we went through a thorough and lengthy process to find Dan, and so we welcome him and thank him. I'd like to thank the department heads. I've had some department heads retire during the last 4 years, and some new ones come in, and they all make a significant contribution to running the city. It all starts with the department heads. Without their leadership, the supervisors and the frontline staff don't have the direction that they need. And with that, I'd like to thank the supervisors and the frontline workers. The job of the city, we wake up every day, as Mark White likes to say sometimes, Public Works makes sure that your toilets run and flush. But the reality is, everything that we go about functionality-wise related to city government is because of the frontline staff that first is in line to do the job, followed by the supervisors and then the department heads and the elected officials. The third group I'd like to thank in the last 4 years is the media, especially SMU with Karen and Andrew. Without their efforts and technology and time that they put in, you wouldn't be able to watch our council meetings. And the Daily Reporter, the reporters that I've worked with are Joe Hopper, Grace Hamilton, Celia Brocker, and Randy Cothran. And KICD, it's a radio, is gracious in their coverage. Matt McWilliams, Corey Hargeth, George Bauer, and Ryan Long on live interviews. KICD is really good with our city staff and different department heads out there with live interviews. I've been fortunate enough to be an elected official in a community where there's not what I would call gotcha media. We're able to have free and open discussions without the worry of being either misquoted or quoted in a way in which might create unnecessary drama. I think the media does a great job covering our events and portraying the accuracy and the facts of what we're trying to do in city government. I'd like to thank Farmers Bank and Jesse Bogenreef for the beautiful stained glass that you see behind us at our city council meetings. These originally hung in Farmers Bank in the project that when City Hall moved and Farmers Bank expanded, they donated those to City Hall, and the decision was made to put them behind the dais. I remember when Jesse Bogenreef, when his studio was in town, when they created these, when Gary Tolsman and staff commissioned those pieces for the bank, and so we're very grateful for that addition into City Hall. And number 5, my family and everybody's family, not just my family, but everybody's family from the staff and elected officials. It takes a lot of time to run the business of the city, and there's a lot of long hours, especially nighttime hours that are put in. And so thank you to all of the families who support the staff and the elected officials. And the last thing I would like to say about the thank yous is that we typically, as elected officials, I guess I could only speak from my perspective as mayor, we usually hear from the citizens in one of 2 scenarios. The first scenario is that they're really happy about something, or they're incredibly frustrated about something. And what I have taken away is in each of those moments, what the people, the concerns that the people have. Number 1, they need to be heard. And number 2, they need to be addressed. It doesn't mean that everybody either gets what they want or what they perceive is the right thing. It means that we follow the process of listening to them, and we certainly appreciate the approachability of the citizens and the elected officials. And like I like to remind everyone, here in Spencer, we're a little unique in the sense that everybody has 3 elected officials. You have 3 votes at the council. There's 2 at-large members and 1 in your ward. Probably the most frequent question I get if somebody's really frustrated about something, it'll start with, I'm going to come to the council meeting and say whatever it is. And while you're certainly welcome to do that, the most effective way is really to deal with the personal relationships of the elected officials. And not only that, but so direct communication and then discussions at our committee meetings. The committee meetings are where the business occurs of creative discussion and the conflict or the problems we're trying to solve typically get discussed at that level. And so I always encourage the constituents, they're always welcome to come to a council meeting, but the most effective way is to deal with your council members directly and then, of course, come to committee meetings. So with that, I'd just like to get in and review a little bit. First, selfishly, a little bit about why I'm passionate about Spencer. My history, I grew up on the east side of the state. Manchester, Iowa was my hometown. So my first experience with Spencer was in a little football game back in 1991. I think one of the best high school football teams probably ever in the state of Iowa, if you talk to a lot of longtime coaches, was here in the city of Spencer for 2 years in a row. That team comprised of Lucas DeWitt. You might recognize that name. Of course, Lucas was a principal here in town for a number of years. Gabe Toff, Kevin Moore, Mark Kirsting, coached by Gary Swenson, and of course a whole lot of other people. And I saw the passion that the fans had. Of course, I was on the opposite team, but you could really see the community spirit. And then in college, at Central College, I went to college with 3 Spencer High School alumnus, Brad Dutler, who ended up being my roommate for 3 years. And in fact, Brad's dad, Daryl, and his wife, Renee, at the time, were the only 2 people I knew when I moved to town in 1998. But I spent a lot of time with Brad. Brad and I came back to a high school playoff game. I can't remember who Spencer played, but the field house was packed. Would have been probably 90, dating myself now, probably 94, 5, right around in there. It was an incredible atmosphere. Nan Cruz was also a classmate of mine at Central College. Nan played volleyball there and currently lives in Sioux Falls. And played football with Mark Ricketts, who was a fantastic tailback at Central College. And so When I was offered the position with the Boy Scouts, there was 10 counties I could live in. Clay was one of them, and I chose Spencer. A lot because of my previous history. Sorry. Sorry. For those who don't know, I'm a hard ass, but I can be emotional. So with that, what I wanted to do is read to you what the oath of office is that we all take. So recently, Mayor Bumgars and Councilman Balk were sworn in, along with Tom Nelson and the other ones that were recently elected. And so, this is what guides us as elected officials. So the oath, we solemnly swear that we will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Iowa, and that we will faithfully and impartially, to the best of our ability, discharge the duties of the office that we hold. And the last part is very intriguing to me. It's as now or hereafter required by law. And so when we take that oath, we are bound by law to do the best job that we can. And so I thought I would go through a couple of the things that we accomplished and things that we didn't accomplish, frankly, over the last 4 years. So when I first ran, I wanted to make two basic statements. One was a commitment to have the big and difficult conversations. Part of my personality type is I like the difficult, strategic conversations and tackle the really difficult things. It's taken me a long time in my career to understand not everybody likes that. There's been times in different jobs that I've had where I'll jump, I refer to it right to the jugular, and that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And so I've done the best I could to consciously try to approach the big topics and have those conversations, but not be so aggressive that it shuts people off. And so that was the first thing. And the second thing I always said when I ran was, if we fail, it's not going to be because we did not try. Now, I also believe in accountability. So here's the three biggest failures and why. So the first one is commercial air service. So that's a big deal. So there used to obviously be commercial air service here in town. Amanda and I tried to tackle that along with the corridor, and we did. It initially came up kind of in a duplicitous manner, meaning that Amanda and I were kind of working on it, and then at the same time, the corridor was getting feedback on it. And in the Gross-Spencer Commission, it was identified as one of the challenges that we have. We face rural isolationism. We're 2 to 3 hours from a major commercial airport, and so that can be a difficulty recruiting people to come live here. We've heard it from the healthcare industry. We've heard it from other places where the rural isolationism is a real issue. And we got close. We found Air Choice One. They had a Essential Air Service Act contract out of Mason City and Fort Dodge. It would have cost initially about a big number, about $1 million to run a 1-year, twice a day. I believe it was twice a day. It might have been 3 times a day, but I think it was twice a day service out of here. Through time, that got back down to 6 months. We could have spent about $500,000 to $600,000 on the test to see if we could have done that. We were in the middle of the council discussion to try to allocate some funds and see if we could do that. COVID hit right at the time that we would have had the big fiscal conversation, and as it turns out, it was probably a good thing that we didn't move forward with that, as Air Choice One lost the EAS contract with Mason City and Fort Dodge. There's now a larger jet service that flies out of those two cities, probably larger jets than we could handle here at our airport. But what I want people to know is what we found out through that process is that our regional airport is incredibly important. Travel is important, and the business aspect of a healthy airport is important. The airport is cash flow positive, and it's a great resource for our area. Number 2 failure was ag tech startup and networking in the ag tech space. My second campaign, I ran on ag tech as being a critical component of our future growth. I still believe that. The holdup that we had there was COVID, really. Kylie Miller from the Corridor and myself were signed up to attend the World Ag Tech Expo in San Francisco. And that was it was either end of January or early February when COVID first hit. And the airlines got shut down and the conference got canceled. But Kylie had done a really good job of networking with companies ahead of time. There were some companies who were interested in having some discussions at the conference. I still believe, based on our resources that we have and the potential that we have in our area, that ag technology and ag startup companies are a great resource that we should still try to chase. Brian Dalzell at the Corridor was also in the process of networking with the startup engines in the state of Iowa. There's 2 or 3 significant ag tech startup accelerators in the state, and he was doing a good job of that. He has since transitioned out of the Corridor, but I still believe that's an area that could pay dividends. And number 3 is the private community investment in projects in town. I've not done a good job of that the last 4 years. I believe that is a huge potential that exists in Spencer. The last big private family contribution into community-based projects in town would probably be the DeVergston Charitable Trust that contributed to spur on the YMCA child care facility, paid downtown benefits in the renovation of downtown, also contributed to the Parker Historical Society being able to buy and renovate the old Johnston automotive store. I believe that partnership potential exists in the community. I believe it's something that we need to pursue. A great regional example of that is Lamar's, Iowa. The Wells family and the city of Lamar's have a great relationship. They've done some really good projects together. I know Brian and I attended a session, I believe it was down in Sac City at the Northwest Iowa League of Cities meeting, and was that like $3 million, $4 million, Brian, that was left in endowment to the city of Sac City with the stipulation that it was reinvested in the town. And I know there was a handful of significant community projects that occurred because of that. And I think based on some of the projects that we have potentially in the pipeline in the city of Spencer, there is a large opportunity there for families to participate in some significant gifts. When I started my tenure, we started the Grow Spencer Commission that was managed by Amanda, and I'd like to thank those members who were on that: Angela McCauley, Bree Schmidt, Jan Myers, Braden Feline, Clark Cunningham, Kimberly, I'm going to mess up your last name, Weisnant, I believe, Steve Hallgren, and Tyler Heck. That commission had an 18-month lifespan as stipulated by code when we passed it in, and the job of that commission was to really engage the citizens in the first wave of big discussions of how do we move forward in some items. They managed the Toyer study. They were a key component of massaging and developing the new logo of the city, and they came up with several other growth ideas, and so I'd like to thank them. One thing also that we tried early was the Mcclure Study. Amanda negotiated that contract and managed it. We had some good conversations in the arts and culture space about how to gain some efficiencies and possibly have a facility moving forward that streamlines some things. A lot of good discussions. We didn't necessarily have a conclusion to that with an official project, but a lot of good discussion came out of that. My philosophy as mayor, I took some calls. People are always concerned about government overreach, and certainly I believe that the city councils that I have presided over, all of the council people as well are concerned about that. And so some examples where the council has stepped up to address government overreach. That's how I would phrase it anyway. The council, based on the recommendation from the electrical board, repealed the local electrical code guidelines. We received a lot of feedback from people who do business regionally that Spencer was difficult to do business in because we had additional code beyond the, help me Brian, the International Electrical Code. Anybody know? Is that what it's called? Yeah. So we took some steps at the council level to repeal that. It took a couple times going back and forth, but we got that done. We passed the ATV, UTV, and golf cart ordinance. We expanded it. The council before us and Mayor Reynold Peterson did make it available to drive ATVs, UTVs. I can't remember if golf carts were part of that, but they were on a direct path out of town, and we received a lot of feedback that people would like to drive them around town, and the council stepped up and passed that. We've had a lot of positive feedback about that with very little accidents or incidents related to that. Murals, I believe, was introduced by Mayor-elect Bumgars at a council meeting. Him and Leanne Jacobson, Councilwoman Jacobson, I should say, recommended that, and it took, probably 8 to 10 months, I suppose. The part about government overreach related to that is they were restricted. Prior to going through the work of figuring out how to have murals / public art, might sound like a simple topic, but we have a registered historic district with specific historic buildings in the district, and so we had to wade through a lot of the impact and implication of the philosophy of private property rights versus government ordinances versus the jurisdiction of the district, and if a mural on the side of a building would jeopardize the classification of a building, therefore jeopardizing the district. And so there were a lot of different components of people who worked through that, and it came back and forth 2 or 3 times to the council, and we ended up getting an ordinance passed. There's 2 great examples recently that you'll see on the January agenda in continuation. One is the ability of a custom meat business to be operated in Spencer. Prior to this, they would not have been able to operate a custom meat business in the community based on ordinance, and so we repealed that. We didn't really repeal, we just changed and massaged that along with the Planning and Zoning Commission feedback. Also, you'll see on the January agenda the up to $1,000 no-cost permits for projects in people's properties, and the goal of that really is to utilize the staff of the city as a resource without having to worry about paying a fee or a fine or a permit, so that your shed or your project in your yard can be put in the right place without going over easements or electrical lines or making sure that it's up to code. And Alec and his staff have done a really nice job creating a document that'll show you what you need a permit for, don't need a permit for, but we strive to create, as I said, reduce government overreach and be a resource for you, the citizens. And the last example I would have is in the last couple months, we've approved a couple of infringement use agreements on some easements. It's not a standard policy that we have. We don't encourage that, but these particular projects were in such a place that it was acceptable and recommended by staff to do that, and so the council did that. And I believe that council in the future will continue to be a council that will try to continue that movement. We tried to conduct, another one of my philosophies was to conduct the business of the public as publicly as possible and to share and inform. One of the gifts of COVID and one of the gifts of the new setup here at City Hall is the ability to do what we're doing right now today. So previously, if you wanted to come to a council meeting or view a council meeting, you either had to physically be there or wait till it was on SMU. And the ability that we have now is to broadcast live, and what that does is create a nice video archive in a couple different places, one on Facebook, obviously, and one on YouTube. I believe they go to YouTube, to our YouTube channel. Is that right, Brian? Yep. And at some point, as I said, okay, that's in the works. So anyway, the other layer of that is really advancing the topics of discussion at the proper committee meetings. The reason that I did that was I wanted as much media coverage also as possible. So I always felt that if the public had the opportunity to touch that information 2 to 3 and ideally 4 times before we actually voted on something, it wouldn't be out of the blue for you. And again, that's always our goal. We're always accessible via phone, email, in person, and then we try to make the business of the city as public as possible. When I first came in, one of the challenges was addressing the Riverfront plan. I believe it's a plan that has great intention, and there's components of it that certainly can be carried out. The challenge that we ran into really was that the price tag for the whole plan was $20 million, roughly. And we tried to compartmentalize it. The council met several times. We requested information that the planning department did a good job, I think, giving us. Steve Hallgren was the planning director at the time. And one of really the big challenges with that project is the displacement of homeowners and renters if the full plan as presented is carried out. And I think the council will continue to work through the components of that plan. Again, like I said, I believe the plan has elements of it that can be certainly implemented in the community, but that was one of the big initial projects that we had to tackle in our discussions. We had 500-year flood levels right away. I can share a funny story with you. So I live on the river, and I got a phone call from my wife, and she said, well, first of all, any phone call you get from your wife, usually, I think we as guys tend to dismiss a little bit if they give us a little sense of urgency. And so my wife called me and she said, the river is up to the tree where the squirrel feeder is. Now, when I left to go to work in the morning, it was at least 3 feet away from that tree. And so this was only maybe like 4 hours later. And we had been in strategic flood assessment meetings with the city, county, the disaster team that we have in place. And we knew from the National Weather Institute in Sioux Falls that manages the whole floodplain for the Little Sioux River. We got the forecast of where the water levels would be, and the information that my wife was telling me, there was no way based on what I had received in the flood meeting that it was going to be at that level. So to appease her, I said, okay, fine, I'll come home and take a look at it. Well, by the time I got home, it was almost a foot higher than when she had said where it was. And so I could literally see the water coming up in the backyard. And I grabbed some flags, I staked the water lines, about 5 of them, and I watched it for about 15 minutes, and the water kept coming up, and I'm like, I better call Mark White. So I called Mark. Now, in this case, now Mark and I aren't married, but all of a sudden the roles were reversed, right? So I was like when my wife called me, and Mark was like when my wife called me, was me. That didn't really make any sense. But anyway, so I said, Mark, this river is kind of doing stuff that I think is beyond what we're being told. I think you should come look at my yard. Well, okay, I'll come down, kind of the same attitude that I have. I wasn't concerned until Mark came around the corner into my backyard and looked where the water was, and he said, oh boy. So anyway, what we found out was the floodplain didn't necessarily react like the Weather Institute thought, but the intriguing thing that we found was our information was based on where the water level at the Grand Avenue Bridge would be. And then Jim Tesey came out and shot some water elevations, and we found out that north of 18th Street, the water level, elevation-wise, was 2 foot higher than it was downtown at the Grand Avenue Bridge. And the distance between 18th Street and 4th Street was a foot higher than what it was downtown. And basically that's due to the constrictions of the bridges and how the water flows through the different levels. And so we were at the flood level downtown, and then we were a foot higher, and then 2 foot higher. And that was reflective upon the properties that we saw in those different zones. Properties were having problems that never had problems before. And so as we watched that, it was really interesting. And then that next spring, of course, we had high water again. And I remember it was between 2 and 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep. The water, I drove, this was in spring. I remember the ice, it must have been about March. I drove to the corner by where it would be south of the bridge there. And the water was actually overlapping onto Grand Avenue and 4th. And that was at the time that we made the decision to put the additional soil and sand in the berm to do that. So through that, though, what we found out was that while the berms were done by the federal government, they were not official berms, and so we do have the ability in the future to change those or modify those or address those if we want. But certainly flooding was a big, a big topic the first couple years when I was mayor. I'd like to thank the City Hall move, all of the players involved in that. That was Mayor Peterson and that council that made that decision. That decision spurred on, of course, the new development for Northwest Bank on the west side of town. Farmers Bank bought the old City Hall and expanded and added a few jobs, and we renovated City Hall. And so Brian managed that project. Amanda contributed. Public Works helped a little bit in the transition with HVAC and troubleshooting and some things of that nature. And I would just like to thank the council previously for having the vision to make that decision and creating the facility that we currently sit in. One of the great programs that Amanda was in charge of really kind of rallying back together was the Retail Kickstarter program, funded by the banks and the city and administered by Main Street. We really appreciate all of the projects and the business owners that have taken advantage of those funds. The program will need to be revisited as the funds are currently need replenished. We've seen a lot of housing growth. Housing meaning places to live. Windcrest Second Edition has gone up. The IGL Westfield Edition is currently in the process of going up. Commercial growth includes a lot of downtown businesses that have bought properties and renovated them. On the north end of town, of course, Schoenemann's, we thank them for their reinvestment in their facility. Rental has put up a new facility at the North Y. One of the big developments that occurred shortly after I was elected was the sale of the Spec building, which sat empty for quite some time. And if nothing else, it was an emotional when we did strategically change the price of the building, which took the collaboration and coordination of all of the investment partners. And so we'd like to thank MWI for purchasing that building and filling that. Events and people that occurred in the last 4 years, I'd like to share with you that have impacted me. Jasmine Howe was one of the organizers of the Black Lives Matter march and movement. And so give you a peek behind the curtain how we managed that. We found out on social media. It wasn't anything that was they didn't take a park permit out as normally would happen. So what we did was we immediately contacted the organizers of it. We asked them what their plans were. We coordinated with law enforcement and the community to inform them about that. And it was a day where there were between 600 and 700 people who participated in the march. I spoke at the march. I was asked to speak. It was an interesting experience. Everybody who marched, as well as everybody who watched, as well as everybody who took the time to defend, or however you want to say, partake in the event, it all came off without any incident, without any arrests. I'd like to thank everyone involved with that, the state troopers, the sheriff's department, the surrounding communities that participated, and of course our local law enforcement. I had the opportunity to really, I wish everybody had the opportunity that I had that day, where I initially met that day down at the park with the organizers. I then went down to the police department and got to see the coordination to protect our community there. And then I got to participate in the march with a speech, and then go back into the PD. And everybody, I think, should be really proud of how everyone conducted themselves that day. The second person and event that has an impact on me is Brock Storm. So Brock, I believe it was 2 years ago probably, Brock, who is an incredibly talented artist. If you haven't seen his art, I would encourage you to check it out. Brock did a public display piece and had padlocked it to one of the there's multiple ones, to the street lights in the downtown area. And when I was aware of that, I contacted Public Works. I had them cut those off. They were padlocked on. And I did that because the public portion of the right-of-way and the street lights, the median, those are public pieces of property. They don't belong to anybody for a particular cause. After I did that, the first thing I did was I got a hold of Brock. and I called Dave and Tori, his parents, and asked if they had Brock's number. I didn't have it. Brock was at their house. So I went to Dave and Tori's house, and I talked to Brock directly. I wanted him to know that I'm the one that ordered the art to be taken down, why I had it taken down. But I also wanted him to know that I believed in his cause, and I believed that he had the right to advocate, for what he wanted to. Probably, it didn't get a lot of First Amendment attention, but it was really probably the first First Amendment thing that I addressed when I was mayor. And I worked a agreement out with Brock that, if he didn't put them back up on the light poles, that I certainly would take his art to the council meeting. We actually had a council meeting that night, and I did that. I brought that piece here. I displayed it during my mayor's report. We talked a little bit about Pride Month and what it means and what Brock's intention was. And if you recall, in June of 2020, the tensions were really high with COVID and everything going on, and so we handled that, I think, in a manner that everyone could appreciate. And so I'd like to thank Brock for that experience. Brock made a nice post afterwards, and I think it ended well. And in fact, you can still see a couple of those pieces displayed. One's on a piece of property downtown, and one is on a piece of property in the Grand Avenue Boulevard, and his art still stands in the public. The third, obviously, would be Calvin, our friend Calvin. Calvin and I have probably had lunch at least 10 or 12 times. That was an interesting situation. It's not every day that one of the Des Moines Register editorialists, Rebecca Basu, calls you and asks for some quotes because they're doing a story on you. And if you know anything about Rebecca's work, it's typically she covers a lot of controversial topics. And that's a deal where there's a lot of layers to that particular topic. First Amendment is where a lot of people wanted to go. First Amendment typically deals with opinion. Calvin reads the gospel. Calvin doesn't pontificate his opinion, so there was a little bit of nuance there. But it was at my direction that I asked City Attorney Don Hemphill to give his opinion on if there was anything that we could do to try to address the situation, or what are the manner in which the community can have the discussion about this. And of course we went down the path of discussing different freedom of speech zones. Is that the right thing to do, not do? What I really enjoyed about that process, number one, was getting to know Calvin. In fact, I had Calvin on one of my mayor's press conferences. And number two, at the beginning I said we'd make the commitment to have the big difficult decisions and discussions, and that's an example of where we had the discussions, we followed the process, and it got to the point where we felt we had ran the process to where it needed to go. And like I said, Calvin and I have had lunch together in the park probably 10 or 12 times. And so another one of the one of the situations in the last 4 years that has had an impact on me. Challenges that we face, we've got the 100-year floodplain is out now. Those lines are official. One thing that the council will have to tackle in the future is the impact on the Green Industrial Park property. A lot of that now is in the floodplain. That wasn't initially when the park was built, but I'm confident that we will have a plan moving forward. I'd like to thank everybody who worked on the floodplain mapping. So it started clear back when Kirby was still the planning director, and then Scott was the planning director, and now Alec. They've all put significant time and contribution into that. Robin, who is now retired, and Anna have all put a tremendous amount of time into that, so thank you for that. Some fun projects that have happened downtown. You'll notice there's new street signs. They're brown, and they match the signs that were purchased by the Grand Avenue Improvement Corporation. We thought that that touch that they made on the north end of the boulevard would be nice to extend down through the Main Street district. The light project, this is probably one of my most fun moments where, again, Brian Weave is to my left. Sometimes I'll say things for Brian about we should spend money just to see what kind of look he has on his face. And so the peek behind the curtain there was we were at a committee, I think it was a committee of the whole meeting, and Nancy was there, and I want to say the initial project was like right around $400,000. That's not what it ended up costing, but the discussion was twofold. Number one, how much should the city contribute to the project? And then number two, should Main Street do just white lights, which were cheaper, significantly, about half, or a system that is colored and programmable and can change, during the night. And I turned to Brian and I said, well, can't we just pay for the whole thing and then they pay us back? And Brian's eyes got about this big. And the short version is the project cost half what we thought it would. We were able to find some funds that we could advance to get the lights purchased, and then set an agreement up in which we contributed an amount of money, but we also got paid back through the process of the difference between what we initially laid out and what our actual contribution to the plan was. And so I'd like to thank Nancy Nave for all of her work on that, all of the business owners downtown who have been gracious enough to allow the lights to either be strung on their building or be wired into their building. And if you've ever been downtown, I think it really adds another element to the experience that you have downtown. I'd like to thank all of the business owner investments that I discussed downtown, as well as in the north and south end of town. The housing study by the corridor was completed in our tenure. What we learned there was there's a there's a demand that was stated in there for between 120 to 180 homes in the next 5 to 80 years. By homes, I'm not necessarily talking single family dwellings, but the ability for new occupancy in 120 to 180 dwellings. And so the council is certainly in the process of trying to address that. How do we meet that need? The workforce labor shed study by the corridor was completed in that tenure, and what we found was that almost 48% of the workforce commutes into our community every day, and that equates to roughly about 4,800 people. And so as we look forward to ways to capture growth, there's certainly a market segment there. We're in the process of investigating the Menards intersection. I talked a little bit about it yesterday, but where we're at in that process is the state has to get us some final data on speed zone recommendations. They've already given us some recommendations on some changes to the layout, but that Menards intersection and the McDonald's and Walmart intersection, why I bring that up, the relevance of it is we receive a lot of phone calls. Like I said, there's 2 times that we usually receive phone calls, and when you receive a phone call, asking, for something to be done, those are ones you don't forget. I don't know the name, but it was a family member, and they just asked for something to be done. It will be done. One of the biggest things that probably occurred that will have a long-lasting impact is the transition of the Spencer Industries Foundation to the Spencer Economic Development Corporation. Amanda put a ton of time into that, as well as Steve Pick at SMU. And Phil Christie, who was the chair of SIF at the time. SIF was a great organization, but it was primarily a land holding company that was comprised of a very large board. I think it was over 35 people or so. And Kylie Miller from the corridor made the recommendation to maybe it needed overhauled. It was informative, but not really functional. And so we spent probably a year, I think, looking at different models. We had somebody from Vermilion, South Dakota come over, talk about their model. We looked at other models across the state, and we ended up with the current model. And the relevance of that is it took council action to change the formation of that. And so I believe you'll see projects similar to the one that's occurring by Moose Pond, where the funds are a little more readily available. The board is a lot smaller and can pivot and actually accomplish things at a lot faster rate because of that. And I think that will probably have one of the largest future impacts. The Housing Fund and Jobs Trust is a topic that'll have to be tackled by the next council. The Housing Fund, I believe, only has maybe, is it one house left, two house left worth of funding? So great program. The program is probably, is it 12 years old, Brian? 12, 15? 10 years, at least 10 years. 10 years. So a very simple program, roughly $12,000 to $15,000 is available for a new construction of homes. What the housing study has shown us is that we really need to look strategically into how we invest in the encouragement of property for dwellings, and I think you'll see probably some discussions led into opening that up into a wider range of programs. Certainly nothing is defined yet, but that is the need that we see. The 100-acre land purchase, probably one of the more controversial things that has occurred during my tenure. I take full responsibility for that. I advocated for that. The reason for that is we had to run storm sewer across that property. And it just so happened, it was serendipitous timing, that property also came up for auction. And the reason that I advocated to the council to purchase that land, number one, we had the financial resources to do it. I had asked Brian to run an analysis ahead of time based on our reserve funds. Did we even have the potential or ability to do a project like that? And asked for a number that he felt comfortable with that wouldn't jeopardize our reserve balances. And so we had a closed session. We talked about it in council. And there's two different parcels. 40 acres of it is in the city limits, and SMU provides power to it. 60 acres is in the county. And based on the amount of money that we would have had to lay out to buy the easement to run the storm sewer, as well as then not being able to utilize the land, just the easement, we had discussion at the council and decided on two different numbers. The first number would be what we would like to expend on the 40 acres, and then another number based on, again, Brian's recommendation of financial tolerance to not put any funds in jeopardy of what we would pay for the balance of the 60. We don't have definitive plans for that, but it's a potential piece that can be discussed to address a lot of different needs that we have. And so that is the reason for the purchase of that, to allow for the future growth of the community and to have the discussion of how we want to move forward. The 150th sesquicentennial, easy for me to say, celebration of the community occurred this summer. It was quite an honor to be the mayor during that time. I'd like to thank everybody who put all of the time capsule and events together. The ceremony in the fall at the courthouse was special. And for me personally, what really hit me was when we had the reception, the Sesquicentennial Committee had the reception at the Clay County Heritage Museum, and the governor was there, and people spoke. But when you see your name on the list of previous mayors, two things hit me. Number one, most of the people in the room didn't know the names of the mayors, right? Because they were a long time ago. So at the end of the day, it's really kind of irrelevant as time moves on. But number two was just the gravitas of the honor to be on that list. So that was a kind of a neat moment for me that I thank the public for. Internally, things that I did, we restructured the committees from 5 to 7. The reason for that was I felt that 5 committees didn't allow each council person to chair a committee, and I thought that the leadership that sits at this dais is incredible, and each person that's a council person deserves, in my opinion, the right to advocate and lead a particular portion of the future of the city, and so that was my way to enable that. We tackled through Amanda's leadership, tackled the position matrix. The goal was twofold. Number one, to extend the opportunity for people to continue to earn money, so we added steps, and then to look at the wage comparisons in relation to the private sector in the job duties. And things change fast. I've received some feedback, and we've really never had difficulty filling positions, I think, until recently. Part of it's due to everybody's having trouble filling positions, but also part of it, I think the market in the last 2 years since we adopted the matrix has also changed. And so there are some positions that I think the council might want to look at moving forward. We added the Department of Human Resources. We felt that the burden of trying to understand HR law and HR, moving pieces, to put that responsibility on every department head and on Teresa, the city clerk, who has a full plate of doing clerk stuff, really wasn't the most productive way to conduct the management of the people of the city. And so we added that position, and Jessica's on board, and we're excited about that, which led into the facilitation of the hiring process for the city manager. The council, through a lot of discussion, felt that if we controlled the internal process, we could get the candidate that best is suited for this particular time in the current state of the city. We believe we have that in Dan Gifford, and I believe the process, while long and probably had a few more hurdles than we would have liked, what I appreciated as the mayor is that the council at each and every time was up for the discussion of how to proceed forward and pivot and proceed again in the process of finding the city manager. And so again, I believe that's the commitment of the council, to having the discussions about the big and important topics. I'd like to thank the Clay County Visitors Bureau. We've had a lot of discussions in the last 2 years about how they can be a little more productive and what the role of public funding into that is, and I believe that they'll change some things and be a better organization. They're a great organization as it sits today, but I believe the ideas that they have moving forward are fantastic. Just like to thank everyone for that's been involved in those discussions. And also probably the biggest process thing that we did, a lot of it with Brian's leadership, is budget overhaul discussions. If there's anything that's a sensitive topic and also probably a difficult topic, is the discussion of the budget and how money is spent and where money is spent. And over the last 4 years, we've had, I think, a lot of great discussions, not necessarily final decisions, but a lot of great discussions about how to move the community forward and where to spend the money. If you look at powder in the keg, Spencer's probably one of the lowest leveraged communities in the state of Iowa as it relates to borrowing capacity versus money borrowed. And that's a good thing. It means we're healthy, we have cash, we can do things, but at the same time it also means that there's big projects that we haven't tackled yet that we can tackle. And so those will really be the conversations probably in the next 18 to 24 months that will be, again, some maybe uncomfortable. It'll be difficult, but the great news in all of that is, number one, the staff and the elected officials are willing to have those conversations, and number two, we have the ability to be able to fund those projects. And so the difficulty will be figuring out how and what to fund. So what does the future hold? The census results tell us that we are an outlier in rural Iowa. We grew, most of rural Iowa shrunk. What does that mean? The most common question I get asked is, well, how do we grow, Mayor? You ran on a pro-growth platform, and where do we grow? And what I would share with you is I believe that we need, as leaders, to create an environment that is the best living experience that people can have while they live here. And what I mean by that specifically is people will come into our community and out of the community in factors that we can't necessarily control, or things that are policy related. And I'll give you 3 firsthand examples of that. People who, 2 of them were in media, and one of them actually had my former job with the Boy Scouts. But in the last I think Joe maybe left 6-10 months ago. Matt McWilliams from KICD, you used to see Matt here covering the council meetings. Joe Hopper from the Daily Reporter, and Andy Green, who worked for the Boy Scouts, have all left our community in the last 3 years. And if you look at those 3 people, they were all passionate about Spencer. They loved Spencer. They had a good social life in Spencer. They had a good professional life in Spencer, and they all left for another professional opportunity. And that's not a negative thing. They speak well of the community, and they were contributors here. In fact, Andy Green was part of the Spencer Daily podcast with Kevin Brown and Tim Weideman. Tim Weideman's another example. Tim used to work at the Corridor and did some other things around town, and he now lives in Lincoln, Nebraska. Tim has nothing but good things to say. Tim and his wife left again for economic opportunity in their professions. And so what we need to continue to do is just build the best community that we can. And the outcomes that we can control, we try to control, and the outcomes that we can't, we don't. And so as we continue to move forward, I would just put that out there, that you don't always measure the growth and the livability of a community by the census. You really measure it by what people say when they live here. So as we move forward, the big picture thing to tackle will be, in my opinion, the social good infrastructure investment versus the taxable valuation investment. So what I mean by that is, in the last 20 years, this community has done a really good job on the social good infrastructure investment. We redid the downtown, which has had a significant impact on the infrastructure, followed by the storefront initiative with SMU and the banks, followed by the Grand Avenue renovation up through the boulevard. It all looks fantastic. We now have 18 miles of bike trail. Fantastic. We have a lot of good things in the hopper, and we also have projects that need funded in this sector with the park master plan and the desire for a splash pad and pool renovation and things of that nature, versus the taxable valuation investment. So we've done a good job in the last 20 years adding. So like when I moved here in 98, Menards was not here, Walmart was not here. There's certainly been some big commercial projects that have occurred on the east side of town in the Green Industrial Park. But what we face in building the budget as elected officials, when we look at the levy rate, is our taxable valuation has not grown in the same bell curve that our demand for spending within the budget is. And so what the council will be faced with moving forward is the discussion between where do we invest our money? What do we do? Do we do it all? Do we move in more on one side or the other? We have some potential at the North Y that we heard at the last committee meeting for Public Works about a investment there that would produce commercial highway lots, which then would turn to addable taxable valuation. Part of my advocacy for the 100-acre purchase was to add housing, which would add taxable valuation. What we need to do for the budget, in my opinion, is to grow our way out of it by adding taxable valuation. And that means reinvestment in current properties to add value, as well as growth in new properties. And so that's what the next council will face, is the balance between social good infrastructure investment and taxable valuation investment. And again, the good news is they're willing to have the conversation, and we have the resources to be able to pull that off. So what I would like to do now is one of the final things. I'll talk about COVID. So COVID, 2 years. We are 2 years into this. When this first occurred, remember the cruise ship pulls into the United States and it can't dock, and this is overseas, and will it occur here? And being proactive, we had a great meeting. We had the hospital staff, their disease experts, Bill Baumgartner, and the key city leaders. We had a conversation about public safety and what do we do, and that spun off into the COVID task force, which did great things in my opinion. We were one of the only places in the state of Iowa, if you can imagine this, where there was a joint effort between county officials, city officials, the hospital officials, working together in tandem. We met daily. We talked about the numbers. We talked about strategies. And initially the city government role of that was relaying what the governor was going to do. And nobody knew, right? Not even our local legislators. Megan Jones participated on those calls. She didn't even know when Governor Reynolds would have a press conference what was going to happen. And then it got real serious when the governor started to shut down food restaurants, barber shops, tanning salons, all these places. And it's not the governor's office that they call. It's City Hall. my phone started to ring. Mayor, I own a restaurant. Do I really have to shut it down? Mayor, do I really have to shut down my beautician salon? Mayor, do I really have to shut down my daycare? These were the things that we wrestled with. And we had to carry forward what the governor had put into law. And, that actually still exists. That proclamation, Governor Reynolds keeps extending. I've asked the state legislature and I've asked the governor's office to extinguish it. It's still in place. The reason it's in place, I'm told, is because there's language in it that allows for when federal funds flow into the state, they can then flow into the communities. But so we currently are in a health disaster proclamation status. Now, I challenge that we are when you look at how we currently live. Again, 2 years. I remember on our first call, Jeff Messerol from the hospital, we asked him, how long do you think this will last? And we were talking, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. Remember, 12 days to flatten the curve. Take the next 12 days to shut the economy down. And that seemed like an eternity. 12 days. Really? 12 days? We really have to do this for 12 days? We're 2 years into it now. And about 10 to 12 months into it is when the first dynamic really started to change. So the governor started to open things back up. The role of local government started to ease back. And it really became more of a healthcare, in my opinion, healthcare-dominated situation. So I'll share with you a little bit about my philosophy and how I handled it. I've stated this publicly several times. If you get to the point where you're relying on your mayor for healthcare advice, you're in trouble. I believe that. I'm not a physician. Look, I went to college and I have an elementary education degree with a social studies endorsement. I'm supposed to be teaching history, okay? You don't want to take healthcare advice from me. And I held steadfast to that through the whole process. One of the more I'll use the word intense, but it was not intense. Just the gravitas of it was intense. When Bill Baumgartner and I, the CEO of the hospital, had a great conversation about, the community safety of masking. And Bill wanted me to issue a proclamation to mask. And I refused to do that. I didn't refuse to do that because I didn't think that masks work or don't work or anything like that. I just didn't feel that was my role as mayor in the state of Iowa. Per Iowa code, the boards of health have the jurisdiction and the ability to do that. And so my suggestion to Bill was that we follow Iowa code and that we run that through the healthcare professionals. And if the county board of health felt that we needed to have a mask policy, then we needed to do that. You did see mayors across the state of Iowa put proclamations out. Number one, they're not worth the paper they're written on. And number two, most of them were political statements against our governor. And I don't play those politics. I've stated before several times we don't have R's and D's behind our names here on the dais. You don't see that behind my name. And my personal philosophies of government at the state and federal level don't enter into it. I don't have the authority as mayor to do that. So the County Board of Health, I think, did a great job. They had the tough discussions. We supported their decision. They put benchmarks in it. Had questions about why it went to the county supervisors. The way the Iowa code works is that there's local, regional, and county boards of health in the code, and whoever the offsetting governmental body is to the Board of Health, they're the ones that actually have to pass the code. And so ours is at the county level, so the County Board of Health relayed that over to the County Board of Supervisors, and that's why the County Board of Supervisors didn't have the right to change anything that the Board of Health put into what they wanted, and so they voted it in. Now, we're a year from that. Things are certainly different now with vaccines. They're different with people's personal philosophies. They're different at the federal level. They're different at the state level. There's a whole lot of different, schisms, I would call them, that get developed between personal philosophies, work philosophies. Are you keeping me safe? Am I keeping you safe? But I still want to live, but I want to be safe. Here's what I would tell you as your outgoing mayor. There are things in our life that we all take personal risk mitigation strategies for. Whether it's your diet, your exercise, whether you choose to parachute out of a plane on vacation, whether you choose to not parachute out of a plane on vacation, whether you choose to get vaccinated, not vaccinated, booster for the third time, whatever it is. All I've ever advocated for people to do is, number one, do your homework. Do your homework. You are responsible for yourself and your decisions. Number two, be informed. When you do your research, be informed. Don't try to get it from one single source. Get it from as many different sources as you can. And number three, choose the personal risk mitigation strategy that you feel comfortable with. That's my philosophy on it. I don't believe your local government, your state government, or your federal government ought to be in the business of telling you what you should do with your medical freedoms. I think that you are responsible for your own life. I saw that with my father. My father died during COVID. My dad normally was probably about 240, 250 pounds. He developed cancer. Of course, he's stubborn, wouldn't tell any of us. Right during COVID was hitting, I got a call in January from a family friend of mine. They went there. Dad was on the couch, couldn't get up. And I had been home 3 weeks before. I knew he was not well. He probably weighed about 155 pounds when I was there. But by the time that my brother and I got there, so that's like late January, Dad weighed probably about 125 pounds. He chose to not take treatment. He chose to, my brother and I took care of him. He died April 2nd. So during this whole COVID mess, I was going back and forth with my brother. So he'd be there 4 days. I'd be there 4 days. We'd 4 hours away from here. One of the gifts of COVID, I guess you could say, is I was able to never miss a council meeting. Because of that, we were doing our meetings virtually. Probably one of the oddest council meetings I ever presided over was at Sparky's, which unfortunately has had a fire recently, but the Sparky's on Highway 20 and 4. I pulled over, my signal was strong enough, and I ran the council meeting in my pickup truck in the parking lot at Sparky's. But anyway, I saw, that my dad was able to, choose how he wanted to make his medical choices, and I just believe everybody has that right. And so as we talk about COVID and we move forward, COVID is certainly real. COVID impacts people. The science is ever changing. And, as your mayor, I tried to keep politics out of it and tried to always advocate over to the healthcare professionals to give you the best advice that they could give. All right. With that, what I would say is I will end the press conference the way I always do. I usually try to say 3 things: stay vigilant, be free, and God bless. My final thank you would be to all those who have offered prayer for us as elected officials. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity for somebody to tell you directly that they prayed for you. It is very impactful, and there are people who pray every day for elected officials. If you knew Pastor John Syvertson, who used to be out at St. Luke's, he's now up in the Twin Cities. I was in Kiwanis with him, Daybreakers. He would always, part of his daily prayer was for elected officials at the local, state, and federal level. At times during tension in the community, some of the events that I mentioned, I would receive emails or phone calls from people where they said that they pray for us. When you saw the Black Lives Matter march, there were people who had a prayer walk downtown, and I would especially like to thank Pastor Brad Wallace and the Faith Pentecostal Church. They frequently pray for our local city government. I believe it does make a difference. I do believe in the Word, and I'd like to also thank Pastor Wallace and his congregation. One of the greatest honors I had as mayor was they invited me to share a message from the pulpit on a Sunday. It might have been the Sunday before I announced I wasn't going to run again. We might have to blame Pastor Wallace on that. But outside of cooking a meal for somebody, I believe sharing the gospel from the pulpit's probably the next closest thing that you can get to sincerity, and I appreciate that opportunity. And so I will end today with a passage that I believe, for me anyway, is a good summary of how we approach what God gives us as elected officials, and what we do when we reflect on how to lead the community. And it comes from 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 8 through 11. And it is as follows. Above all, hold unfailing your love for one another. Since love covers a multitude of sins, practice hospitality ungrudgingly to one another. As each has received a gift, employ it for another, as good stewards of God's varied grace. Whoever speaks as one who utters oracles of God, whoever renders service as one who renders it by the strength which God supplies, in order that in everything God may be glorified through Jesus Christ. To him belong glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. As I have walked this path as mayor, I have seen my fellow elected officials and citizens display those characteristics. I believe it sums up the constitutional oath that we take in the role of an elected official. And how I would like to end my last press conference is a tribute to my mom and dad. My mom died January 2017. That was the year that I ran. And I told you my dad died. Sorry, April 2nd. So as a kid, they had a vast record collection. And, you know, I think as a kid, you're annoyed by the music that your parents play. But I still have the old turntable that sat in our living room. Kind of really more of a, well, as you've seen today, a little more of a sentimental kind of guy. But this is a song and a LP that my mom used to play. So if you're a fan of Marvel movies, you know there's always a post-credit scene. So this is my version of a post-credit scene. So you may be asking, why do I end my press conferences with stay vigilant, be free, and God bless? Well, I told you I have a social studies degree. I always thought I'd be a teacher. I enjoy government. I also enjoy the nuance of it. So it's very intentional when I say these things, and I just want to let you know why. Stay vigilant. If you look at the Merriam-Webster definition of vigilant, it means carefully noticing problems or signs of danger. The synonyms are alert, attentive, awake, observant, and watchful. As citizens and as elected officials, you should always be vigilant. Be free. The definition of freedom, according to Merriam-Webster, there are several, but if you look at 2A is having the legal and political rights of a citizen. 2B is enjoying civil and political liberty. 2C is enjoying political independence of freedom from outside of domination. D is enjoying personal freedom not subject to the control of domination of another. The synonyms are autonomous, independent, and to liberate. You should always be free. And I believe your local government is the one who fights the hardest to ensure your freedoms. And God bless. It literally means God bless. To bless means to confer or invoke divine favor upon. When I say God bless, I literally mean God bless you. And with that, stay vigilant, be free, and God bless.